for the different types of papers that we want to see at the conference. So basically, papers need to be thrown into different buckets. So we can have different buckets. These different buckets can have different evaluation criteria, and that is basically the idea of what we are up to. So papers need to be thrown into different buckets with different evaluation criteria, with different program committees. So these buckets have different program committees and different chairs, and these buckets are called tracks. This is exactly the track system that was introduced already yesterday, and that hopefully gives you a little bit of an idea at what we aim with this track system, to have maybe a little bit fairer treatment of the different types of papers when introducing different evaluation criteria for the different papers. The tracks, this system, and where we are now in the discussion, is not just, of course, my finding. It is the result of a discussion, to say an ongoing discussion process that started about a year ago, 1.5 years ago. And I'd like to thank at this point members of the steering committee. It was a very intensive discussion, especially with Marlon Dumas, and also discussed with many colleagues of the broader BPM community. So I was using also my sabbatical, was traveling to different places, discussing this track system and gathering feedback, and all the other members of the steering committee did so. So at this point, I really like to thank the members of the steering committee and everybody who gave feedback to that idea. Okay. So the question is how to cut the cake. So also, I mean, that's not the coffee break yet, like that. So it looks a bit like that. But the question is how to cut the cake. And the first idea, and we discussed this about a year ago, was to say, well, the obvious thing was to use the BPM lifecycle. I mean, we use the BPM lifecycle for organizing things, and it's very useful for organizing the different phases, modeling, design, analysis, configuration, implementation, enactment, runtime, and then we have evaluation, mining, and intelligence. So that was the first idea, and then we discussed, well, is it really helpful to do it like this? Because in each of the areas we might have different topics that we discuss, and different research methods might be used. So I might, if we look at the process mining area, we might devise a new algorithm. We might investigate the runtime properties from a theoretical perspective. We might look at certain formal properties of the algorithm, and obviously that's also nothing that we would really empirically evaluate. So in this context, also the empirical evaluation would not really make sense. So we would, this separation along the lines of the BPM lifecycle would probably not help much, and we discussed and we agreed that. So we came up with the idea to base that on what we call research methods. And research methods is we look at, well, different ways of conducting research. I'm going to show them in a minute. Basically, there are these three tracks, these three types of research methods that we have investigated, and that is at the same time the structure of next year's BPM conference. So we will next year have 3 tracks. So the track 1 looks at foundations, looks at well, conceptual, theoretical work underlying BPM system. And we have the track chair, it's Marco Montali, who is also surely in this room, waving his arm up there. The engineering track is chaired by Ingo Weber, also here, waving his hand. And the management track is chaired by Jan van Brocke. He cannot be here to other things, but there are people also who can represent this track here. So we have Peter and Anna. Maybe you can also wave your hand, so if there are questions, if questions on this track, you can also address Anna and Peter. There will also be the role of a so-called consolidation chair, because the idea is that the reviewing process will be a per-track thing. So there will be 3 reviewing processes with 3 different types of evaluation criteria and 3 track chairs, and then from these input, we will have a consolidation phase, and there's another role, and I will play the role as you see here next year to come up then with a final program. And so that is what we're up to in the next year, and we of course ask for your support and for to make that happen and to make that also a success. In terms of research, the separation on research tracks I think makes a lot of sense, because I mean we could have cut the cake also horizontally more, and it would be more along the life cycle. So I mean it's a more healthy way to cut it like this, I think. All right, maybe a few words on the individual tracks. So track 1 focuses on principles that are underlying BPM systems. And we'll have in the call for papers that will be published after the conference next week, we will have on each track, you should send your paper to track 1, 2, 3 if certain properties hold, and we try to make that as sharp as possible. So here we say you should submit your paper to the foundations track if it advances the state of the art in BPM through the study and development of formal methods, algorithms, concepts, and architectures. If it tackled conceptual modeling issues of BPM systems and the environment, and if it tackles novel concepts of BPM systems through the development of proof of concept implementations. Now the question is always is that a conjunction or a disjunction? And it's not a formal, so science is not a formal thing. Yeah, we could. I was in the blockchain also discussion, and it's not a smart contract. Yeah? I should not send that as a smart contract, and then the system decides which way to go. It's not a formal way. If your paper has none of these points, maybe it's not a good idea to submit it here. If it has all of these points, maybe it's a very good idea to put it here, but it's not necessarily to have all of these points. So it's basically we call it computer science perspective, where we are interested in, let's say, a study development of formal methods, algorithms, and architectures. The engineering track is content with the design of artifacts and their empirical evaluation in context. So that's what we have, decided to do. So you should send your paper to track 2 if it has a significant technical contribution, if its results are empirically evaluated. It reports on a system that you designed with a maturity of at least a prototype that can be evaluated in context. And so we have the intent of tracks 1 and track 2 is that these would cover almost the complete part of current BPM conferences. Yeah, so the papers that we have in recent BPM conferences most of them would fit, almost all of them I would say would fit either to track 1 or track 2. That is the idea here. And where we want to broaden is on the track 3, which looks at management aspects, because BPM also had a management and a business perspective, and this has been overlooked by BPM conferences to some extent over the years. So here we have more of the information systems or information systems engineering, if you want, perspective on BPM systems. Track 3 focuses on BPM methods and techniques and their contribution to business value. It's also sharpening, so the business value is also nothing that was many papers are interested in. So if we work on an algorithm, if we analyze soundness of a system, we are not our primary goal is not to improve the business value of that, right? So it's a different concept, different methods are used there, but still looking at BPM from a more practical perspective, or more industry perspective, if you want. I think the investigation of the business value by different algorithm concepts, also systems, is very useful, I think. You should send your paper to track 3, which addresses a solution to an organizational challenge. if it draws from real-world organization endeavors in BPM, or if it extends the BPM body of knowledge to better contribute to strategy delivery. So that's I think is more or less a new, almost a new area. There were, over the years, there were a number of papers that would fit also the management track, so we have to say that. But we also seen in the opening by Gregor that this year in the management, let's say histogram, there was a 0. Right? And so, but I will not go in line with what Gregor mentioned. If you work in management, you should not send your paper to BPM. You should send your paper to BPM 2018 in Sydney. And there is, if it's a very good paper, there's a very good chance that it's been accepted, because not all tracks are asking for a technical contribution. If you have a strong management paper, if you investigate the aspects that are here, you investigate what's the business value of a system, of a process mining algorithm, or of a technique for managing process variants. If you evaluate what is the context, that would be, I would be very much interested in also learning from these types of things. All right, so that is surely more on the management perspective side. To illustrate that a little bit, I want to just say a few words on a recent or ongoing project in my research group. Some of you might have heard about that. So it's in the area of case management, also a topic that has been around for quite a while. So I want to give you just a very brief 5-minute idea of what this approach is about, and then I try to sketch what are the aspects that we could investigate in tracks 1, 2, and 3 related to this project. So, and that is done work with PhD student Martin Hewelt, who was here in the room. And it's so Martin is in a SOA Med graduate school, so service-oriented architectures in medicine, and we're working in of course the medicine area together with Charité, who is the largest European university hospitals in Berlin. And there we looked, of course, at the processes, and every SOA-Med member is exposed in 1 week to the different wards, different departments of Charité, to just get a feeling of how the processes are executed there. And we found some of the things that are very close to, to the case handling paradigm. So they do unfold over time. So when the patient goes to hospital, it's not clear that, okay, this patient is treated according to that process, regardless of what is being done. But you do an anamnesis, you do a diagnosis, and only then you decide on the steps you do. So this we mean by unfolding of the process. It's driven by staff members in case management speech. That's the knowledge expert who decides, given several options on where to go, but it also contains structured parts and flexible parts. So if a certain investigation has to be done, if a certain treatment has to be done, then you have structured parts, which are little processes that are available to be executed. But these little processes are then combined, and that provides a lot of flexibility. And they, of course, come in many variants. So that led basically to the definition of Chimera, which we also called fragment-based case management. So we have different elements. So we have the process fragments, the data classes, objects. We also have object life cycles, so things that we are quite familiar with, and we combine them to this creature. So the Chimera is a creature from the Greek mythology that somehow has different heads, and maybe these 3 things are the different heads of that Chimera. So. All right, so the idea is just to sketch very briefly, and that is a more convenient or more, let's say, understandable example than the ones from hospitals. So many options might be available to do a certain thing here, very simple order management, create order, validate order, and so forth. So we could put that all into one configurable process model. Heard about that? That would look something like that. So you have this model, and then you can react according to the needs of that particular patient in that context. If you want to have extended functionality, you would need to extend that, and then at least earliest at that point, it gets messy now a little bit. It's not this type of 2,000 node graphs we saw yesterday in one of the presentations, but still imagine in real-world processes. You could not fit all hospital processes in one processes. You would be very close to this 2000 node thing. Okay, and the idea of fragment-based case handling is to use different little process models. These are called fragments, process fragments, to collectively specify a process instance, or a case instance. So the case instance can use the behavior that is specified by these different process fragments. And that's not random, so you cannot jump random from here and there if you want. But it's, let's say, controlled by data objects and states. So we need different things. We have a case model that contains the process fragment. We have a case, so these are the process fragments. This is the data object plus standard UML class diagrams. We have the object life cycles, or the states that data objects can reach, and we have a termination condition. So that's basically now this the approach. I don't want to say much more on that. So what would we investigate in terms of the foundations track? And basically, so there was we had a paper last year in the BPM forum. So we discussed the main aspects here, and we also will have already a demo. So, well, we looked at what are the concepts, what is the semantics of the process overall, what are the formal analysis, can we make sure that we can reach the termination condition, so the process instance terminates if the termination condition is reached, so there are execution guarantees that we can devise from the model. So this, I think, I have a feeling that is pretty much in the formal foundations thing. We are not interested in, let's say, empirical aspects, in runtime aspects. We are definitely not interested, we are not interested in the business value. What is the value at the end of the day of this approach? Since if we were, it's not ready to bring it really in a business scenario. We need maybe 5 years, maybe some time to bring it there. Or maybe it turns out that it does not make it to a business scenario, which still it's, I think, valuable piece of research. Okay, so in the engineering part, or in the engineering track, we could take a look at what's the role of change. So some of us have worked on process change for many years. The nice thing with the fragments is that at runtime you can create new fragments, extend the behavior at runtime of the case instance, and we can evaluate what is, let's say, difference of this approach, and what is more effective to solve problems related to process change or flexibility of program. The same applies to variant management. We could also investigate the understandability of case models and process models. The nice thing of case models is you see the whole, let's say, process instance in one model, and you can do monitoring, things like this. If you have the fragments, it might be, let's say, scattered. The state might be scattered around different fragments. So understandability issues, and there are people in this room working on understandability of process models, and we could also use this approach to take a look at understandability then of these case models, and that would, for me, fall more into the track 2, since it has this empirical aspect that we can use, that we can investigate the artifact also in context. And finally, also there's a prototype, so there's an implementation that is part of what we are working on at HPI. So I cannot really see it. It is part of a system in which we have an event processing engine or event system called Unicorn, and the event systems, the event can then be used by the case management engine Chimera to somehow tailor or execute the process. We discussed that a little bit in this IoT workshop on Monday, and also sketched a little bit there that we can then use any activity. So the idea is that the Chimera engine subscribes to certain events, real-world events, and that was developed in the context of an EU project where it was about transportation chains over Europe, all over Europe. And we can take advantage of IoT events and make that available for process engine. So that's a little bit the overall idea. And we can do also empirical things in this context. We could do a runtime evaluation. So how about the runtime behavior of a classical BPMN engine, like Camunda, for instance, and relate this to the runtime of Chimera. We could take also at the variant management, we could look at systems like Proverb and compare that. So that's just ideas for potential, so it's not something that's been done, but just to give you an idea in this little example on what are topics that could be addressed in the different tracks. The management track, again, what I said, it's about business value. So what is the business value of this fragment-based approach? We would probably need to look concrete at the organization and discuss things like what are the roles in an organization for defining, maintaining, and execute process fragments or cases according to the process fragments. How about agility? Is it faster to change a process using Chimera than to use traditional techniques? What is the cost of change, of implementing a change? These are things that would then could result in an evaluation of the business value of that approach, which also, again, here we have potential management topics that have not been researched so far. And well, how can the approach be used to become more competitive, to react to the challenges of the business environment easier? It's also something for me very high level, but there are methods that can be used to somehow get more insight into this. And that's now you see a little bit the span of the different aspects. So starting from the more formal side, the distance to the business side is then quite large, and therefore we think it's important to have also different evaluation criteria for papers looking more into the formal side, and then on the one side, and papers looking more into the practical or even business value side on the other side. All right, so this shows a little bit that I see options, I see opportunities for also, let's say, something like a value chain of research, if you want, so that it's now an ideal setting, and it will, of course, not be of general use, but I can think about situations where the foundations of certain systems are laid in track one, where it's picked up by the same group, or maybe also by other groups that look into the engineering aspects, that build systems, that evaluate systems in context, and finally that can be taken up by people from management to say, well, that's an interesting system. Let's just find out what is the business value of a system or an approach. And then we'll have, I need to sketch it, we'll have a number of contributions here, and then we have something like this. So we have here on this side, we have maybe the foundations. Here we have the engineering papers, and here we have the management papers. So just to have an idea about what can be the interrelationship between those. That would be nice to see, and we already see if we look at if we look at some of the management papers that have been presented at the conference over the year, it's exactly what happens. So people are not investigating new approaches, but they use new approaches, and then in the management area, they look at how to evaluate that empirically. That brings me to my conclusions, to the end, pretty much on time. So I was here and there, I think, a bit critical towards ourselves, but I think in order to get things moving, maybe it's sometimes a good idea to be explicit. Still, I'm convinced that, of course, BPM is a very successful, highly successful conference. It has proved to be so over the last 14 years, the 15th issue now. It's definitely a very well managed conference with a very strong community. If you come to a BPM conference and you find everything well organized, which is typically it's not coincidence. I can tell you it's of course the hard work of the chairs, but also, let's say, the result of a process, of a bidding process that takes between 2 or 3 years or so, and so that's all part of this very well-managed conference that we are here. I see the opportunity of broadening, not of cutting down, not of accepting less papers, but of broadening, of accepting more papers, of broadening the community. And yeah, well, there's a risk of narrowing that I try to indicate, and there's an opportunity of broadening. We will have this structure, the track structure, starting from next year. We'll have, I think, excellent track chairs. We'll have different buckets, different tracks with different evaluation criteria. So far, and discussed this with many of you, the positive was, the feedback was very positive, and really excited about this opportunity or this development, and really hope we will have success next year and also in the years to come. In general, I see more continuity than it might look. So it's not, I don't think it's really a radical change. So we still have the same, BPM will have the same DNA. So we will not change the DNA of the conference. We are extending. We are extending towards, we are trying to broaden, extend, and try to attract more innovative papers. But not all questions are answered, so there's not a formal specification on to which track I need to send my papers. Maybe if you think about your next BPM paper, you already have an idea whether it goes to track 1, track 2, or track 3, so it's part of the submission, so you need to decide to which track you should send your papers. Of course, you can contact the track chairs or the consolidation chair, of course, but not all questions are answered. We are convinced, or the steering committee is convinced that this is the way to go, that this is a good development, and we'll still ask for your feedback, and we still ask, of course, for your support. I like to end with a series of pictures taken from my group. So as you know, I have this research group in Potsdam. I have it since many years. So we are taking a picture every year when we do an internal retreat. So I have here some picture that some of you might have seen on the web for a while. And I do that for two reasons. I want to appreciate the excellent PhD students and also postdocs I had over the years. And also to make the point that research is about the people who involve themselves, people like the ones working in the group, or people like you, people like the audience here, or in general the BPM community. And yeah, I really ask you for your support also in this new BPM conference structure. And I think if we all go into that direction, then I'm really looking forward towards the next BPM conferences. Thank you very much.
So thanks a lot, Matthias. I think it shows that you have a very balanced and very wise view on the BPM community, and I think it's exactly what we need to move forward. So I would like to open the floor for questions. Hayo?
Thank you very much, Matthias. I enjoyed listening to your reflection, and I also think it's a very attractive setup for the conference next year. Very interested in the results, what it will bring. I have a question, though, which relates to, I think, the core of the idea of the new setup is that, in a sense, the selection becomes more sophisticated because there are more specialized tracks, which at least makes the different topics more explicit, or the breadth of the discipline. Has the steering committee perhaps also considered to make it, in a sense, less sophisticated, to become perhaps simply more accepting of work and less selective, perhaps only focusing on the things that you definitely do not want to have in the conference? I'm asking this because I've read about experiments in computer science conferences where they try to replicate decisions of PCs. And they found that it was very difficult of similar experts to reach the same verdict on these papers, albeit they could find consensus about the poorest papers. So there was also a call for perhaps being more accepting, which the obvious result of having much more papers, higher acceptance rates, etc. Yeah. Have you considered this with the committee?
I'm not sure if that would. I mean, that's an interesting idea, and it would be very simple idea as well. I'm not sure it would solve this problem of having different evaluation criteria for different papers. If we still ask for these three things, core BPM, technical contribution, and evaluation, if we still ask for that, then an excellent paper that doesn't have no empirical evaluation would probably be ranked quite low, and would then, even if we extend the acceptance,